Okay, good. Um, Today we're talking about the listing presentation as far as like the actual time going for the seller and the listing agreement. Good, there you go. As we get started, anybody here focus on only listings, or do you guys do a mixture of all of the above, or what? You guys can chime in if you want to.
Well, I do only listings, but again, I work with one client, so
Right, right. The little different with one client is you already have an established relationship for
right.
sure. I'd be curious to hear if we have time later what your process is, even with your client. I've found with people that I work with, even multiple times, that when I skip the step, like, oh, they know, it usually bit me in the butt. So I always go through, I have a standard sort of process, going over forms, having a conversation, digging deeper, even with clients I know really well, because I know that, they may have heard it 50 times, but the 51st time is the time that they need to hear it, right? So there's some things like that. So, okay.
Okay.
Let me
Is there like a question, Mary?
go ahead, Bartolo. Yeah.
Is there like a cheat sheet of list? I'm very new, that's why I'm asking this. Sorry about that.
Mhm.
Like things that you need to get done in order to complete the deal, like a
Yes.
summarized list.
We're putting together some of those things. Obviously, a mentor, someone working with, will helpful, and I can sit down with you as well. And when we do our contracts 101 class and kind of walk you through sort of process of what to do next. Some of what we're doing today is that kind of step by step. But I will put together sort of like, here's a template of here's
Okay.
a normal transaction. Because every transaction is a little different. You'll have normal pieces to a transaction.
Mhm.
All the agents that have been doing this for a while will tell you that there's nothing normal, because they're dealing with people and personalities and different situations.
Okay.
So anyway, but yes, I'll get that out to you as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So we're in a series talking about working with listing clients. Last week we talked about the getting prepared for the appointment. You got a call. This is not someone you worked with before. Typically, it's someone that wants interested in selling their house, and they're interviewing you as the agent. So, and then this week we're talking more about what happens then. Of course, we did the preparing the listing appointment last time. This time we're doing the presentation and listing contract. Next time we'll do sort of, okay, you got the listing now. How do you market and work with it or agents? And then we'll bring some people in for that one. And then, of course, once you have a contract, once you get an offer or multiple offers, how do you negotiate it and get it to closing? There are unique things a listing agent has to do that is different than a buyer's agent when it comes to a transaction. So that's stuff we'll cover then. And a recap, this is from last time. Obviously, we're getting ready for the appointment, gather the property information, complete a CMA, do a net proceeds based on a range of prices. This is important. You don't know exactly until you get there. You should have a standard listing presentation that you use, that you put together for every listing. You may modify it based on the seller, the experience, the type of property it is, but still, it should be a pretty easy to put together. We talked about what you put into it last time as well, but you want to come prepared. And this is one of those things where you want to bring the listing seller's disclosure. You want to bring 2 copies of the completed listing agreement. The idea is you're assuming you're getting the job. And so you want to be able to leave behind with the signed agreement and leave them a copy. You may not. You may just leave it behind, have them review it, and come back for a second appointment. But this is all about being prepared. Obviously, going by the property prior to, either the week before, the day before, hour before, whatever it may be, to see how the neighborhood is. Because it's going to affect your value as well. Obviously, preparing that, practicing that with other agents is important. And of course, remind sellers and show up early. I always say that if your appointment's at 10 o'clock, get there 10 minutes till. You don't have to knock on the door at 10 till, but they want to see you up front, ready to go as your prompt. As my old football coach said, if you're on time, you're late, right? So it's setting the expectation that you're professional. Pre-listing package is always popular, and arrive early, like I said. Okay. First steps. Now you're at the appointment. You have a plan in place, but with real estate, we have to have a plan to adapt as well. And so you expect things to go in a certain order, and then you'll learn tools to make sure that it does go in that order. But there's always things. You just have to adapt. That's one great thing about a listing presentation. What you have is you've done your prep work. You're going to build rapport. You're going to check the property. You're going to have a listing conversation, and then you're going to have a pricing conversation. And if you got and so typically they do them in the right order, but sometimes you'll do them in different orders. That's fine. But you segment them as a plan. Oh, now we're doing this. This is what we're going to do. So have a plan and be ready to adapt. And before you get there, it's one of those things I wanted to add last week is if there's a recent sale, let's say you made the appointment and it's for next week. They called Friday and you have an appointment on Sunday, and you want to do one last look before we get there. Is there been a recent sale in their neighborhood? Something that the seller may drive by. It doesn't have to be. This has to be a sale because they're going to bring it up in the things. You need to be familiar with what's sold, especially something that's went on the market. Let's say a sign went up nearby. You want to make sure that you're aware and the differences of that property and this property, just to have it in your back pocket. Okay. So generally, this is my process. This is not the what you have to do. This is what has worked for me. Like I said, about 500 closings over the last 20 some years. 400 some of them were listings, and so it's kind of those things. I got really good at what I did for me. So take what you can and modify it for your own use and your own personality. But typically, I would greet the owner at the door. I usually have my business card ready and hand it to them so they know that the face and the card, even though it may be the same, is the same person. I'm dressed professionally, typically for the type of property and the owner. I'm going to walk in, build rapport, but basically, we're going to find a quick place to sit down and chat. This could be either way. I either immediately ask them to give me a tour, or I sit down with them and wherever it may be, in a couch, chairs, ask them questions, get to know them. How long they lived there, how long have they owned the house, are they have family, do they, is what was the most important reasons for them to buy the house when they bought the house. Get to kind of build that rapport. Then you get into questions like, why are you selling? Are you interviewing other agents? Kind of get the basics out of the way. And then say, okay, well, I'd like to tell you how I work, but let's take a tour of your property. This gets them moving. It takes action. You're showing leadership. You're saying you're confident, and you're showing up. You're prepared. You have all the stuff you want to talk to them about. But first, you want to see what they have, and this is a great way of getting that rapport and getting to know them. Is you tour. So they show you around and ask questions. If they've got new countertops, if they've got new roof, ask them how old the roof is. Ask them if it's been replaced. Ask them if there's been any upgrades or paintings. Was it like this when you bought it? Have they had any issues? Just the more you can ask questions, the more do you get them talking, the more rapport and the more professional you're looking. And take notes. Huge factor here is bring a notepad, take notes, because they want to see that you're being professional about this, that you're actually making an assessment, not just on value, but on condition. And you're getting them to talk about their property because they still love their property. It's still their home, right? It hasn't transferred from they're in their home yet to being an objective property they have to sell, right? They still love their home. So you're taking in information and building rapport. This tour doesn't have to take too long, but it has to take long enough to actually ask questions, dialogue with them, get them talking about their home. After that, typically I would come back to the original place or ask to move to the kitchen table. Typically, that's where they like to go. They have some room. They'll typically ask if you want coffee, they want some kind of food, whatever it may be. And of course, be polite, say yes. And then you have your listing presentation ready to go. And this is where the first thing I do is I kind of review the notes. All right, we just did a tour of your house. This, this old. This is what you've done. You replaced the roof. Do you have any warranties on that? Follow-up questions. Did I get that right? Was it in 2010? And as they're dialoguing with you, you're getting information, you're making notes, and it's just really professional. And then you dive deeper, right? And then you ask them, well, okay, do you have a desired sales price in mind? Before I get into all of this stuff, they probably do. Okay. And then, okay, great. You jot that down. You make a note of it because you have to know you're dealing with that, right? You also know if they're dealing with other realtors and what they're looking for and so forth, okay? Then you ask them the questions. Have you sold a home before? If so, how long ago? Did they work with a realtor to do so? And how was their experience? This is all data. And what was it? If it's a bad experience or a good experience, what did you like about it? What you didn't like about it? Once again, you're trying to establish that rapport, but you're also finding out, okay, they may like someone that communicates a lot more often or a lot less or whatever. They may have a certain issue, okay? And it's not about the other realtor. It's just about their experience. And then you go, okay, now we're going to transition to our listing presentation that you prepared. I'm going to show you how I work, kind of explain who I am and how the process works here in this time and date and so forth. And you start going through it with them. Like I'm going through fairly quickly, but this is really a smooth transition. You'll know, okay, great. The next step is let's talk about what we have to offer, how we can market your property, how I work together with sellers, kind of expectations for you and for me, and so forth. And it's a natural transition to do so because you're at the table, you're talking, and so forth. The presentation. Now, in the presentation, we talked a little bit about what to put in it last time. But really, it's designed to talk about who you are and what you've done. So if you don't have experience, you're going to tie more into your company and your partners and people you work with, or your what you've done in other things. But if you have experience, you're talking about, look, I've been in real estate for 25 years. I've closed 420 transactions in listings. I've sold 12 in this neighborhood over the last 6 months or whatever. You may be very powerful. Then you talk about the company and the benefits of working with them. Depending on who you're with, but that HomeSmart is in every city or every state across the nation. We're the 7th largest company, which gives us a lot of agents sending buyers from other places moving to Texas. Just gives you whatever it may be. It doesn't have to be a lot, but it's a benefit to them of the exposure you get for their property. And then you go, well, this is also kind of some of the things. There's the standard things I do to get every property sold, and whether it be flyers, virtual tours, pictures, lockbox, social media, whatever you do for every listing. And then in addition to that, you can talk about things that you could do for this type of property. It may be a high-end property, it may be a waterfront property, maybe whatever it may be. You want to have specifics for that niche of a property that sets you apart. Okay. It's always good to share examples. So if you've done things in that neighborhood, or if you've done things in that price range or high-end stuff, share your marketing material. I've shared postcards, I've shared marketing flyers, I've shared that I really did on a previous listing. I make copies of it and put it in every listing presentation, and they get to feel it. They look at it and go, wow, this is high quality. This is really nice stuff. So make sure that if you have it, make sure you're showing it, right? It's really, really important. And then you talk about how you work. I always talk about, okay, with listings of this price range, typically this is how we work as far as showings goes. This is, I am talking to you every 2 weeks about price. Communicate by text. You communicate by email. Are you a phone call person? Or are you a sit down and have coffee person? I'm flexible that way, but we want to set that up front so I can meet your expectation, right? So this idea is you get them to feed in. No, I prefer text. Okay, great. I prefer calls. Great. Okay, well, I like a cadence of every Friday I'm calling you at this time to give you a report of how things are going. On the showings, we're gonna make sure that the buyer is pre-vetted, they've got pre-approval, and on these type of showings, I'll be present or I won't be present. You set the sort of tone of what to expect from working with you, the cadence of when you'll communicate, and kind of what to expect from them as well. You're working along this thing as you're leading them along of what you can do to sell their property and get the most money in the quickest time, but also what it's like working directly with you in the process. At this point, though, you've set the expectation. You're going to gauge kind of where they're at. Are they asking? Are they going? Oh yeah, but what are you going to price the property at? Then you need to pivot to the pricing dialogue, which we'll go to in a second. And then after the pricing dialogue, pivot back to the listing agreement, okay? If they're asking about, well, what do you charge? Well, then you just tell them, okay, I'm getting to that next, but I charge X percent, and that's for me and what I offer to a cooperating broker, which I'm going to show you next as part of the process of getting all the buyers, your property exposed to the most amount of buyers to get you the highest price in the shortest amount of time. And if they're uncertain, transition back to your listing contract and go over it. This is what we're going to in a few minutes, just because the more you can show value and confidence, the more they develop trust in you, and the more likely they're going to want to work with you. And all too often, listing agents will send over a listing contract just by DocuSign. No explanation, and then they expect the seller to read it, and then there's maybe issues later, but that's everybody's going to do that. I always bring the 2 copies, and I always leave it behind, but the goal here is to go through the listing contract with them so they know what they're going to be signing when they sign it. So there's not a lot of pressure. It's like, I want to show you kind of what the listing contract looks like if and when you're ready to move forward. And when you go through it, they're ready to move forward. It seems like it's strange, but it's something that they see professionalism in, and you're spending time with them and educating them in the process. No matter how many times they've done this, they appreciate this process. Sorry. So, as I said, the pricing, if they keep pushing this, and I always talk about look, pricing is you have location, which we've heard for years, right? You can't change where your property is located. So where it's located is going to establish a certain amount of value. Market conditions, which I'm going to talk about as well when we do our CMA, affects your value. It could be a down market, an up market. It could be, a inflation, high interest rates, whatever it may be, affects it. So those are things that affect property that we can't do anything about. But there are 3 things we can do that actually affect your sales and how quick it sells in our market. And exposures to market is what I do, which is we've already gone through as far as how I get exposed to the most amount of potential buyers to buy your property. And then condition of the home, as we went through here, there's some things we can talk about when we get ready to price it, about what we can do to make your home show the best and sell quicker than your competition. We can do, or we can adjust based on price. And there's pricing, and pricing is something that once we agree to work together, we come up with together. We're going to go over all the data. We're going to look at all the comps. We're going to look at the market, and we're going to make a decision together to price it appropriately. And then we're going to test it based on how the market responds to that price. We're going to find out if we price it right or not. And then, of course, we go through this whole thing, idea that if we get lots of activity but no showings, well, it's been shown really well. 1,000 people saw it, but no one wants to see it because it's priced too high. Okay. If we have lots of activity, lots of showings and no offers, it's either condition or it's price, and we'll have to figure that out, and make adjustment for there. And so there's ways to test it. And then that's why we're going to be talking about price on a regular basis. But that all happens after we decide to work together or not. And you kind of move on with this. So then typically I would move into the listing presentation. And so many of you, some of you are brand new, never seen this before. Some of you have been doing this forever, and still one of those things that oftentimes you probably gloss over much of the listing agreement. But I like to bring it and just start off with it. Now you go, all right, it's broken up into sections. The first section really is the parties. You, the seller, would be listing your property with the broker, and I represent the broker as the agent for the broker. And basically, you have the party's name, seller, and the broker's name. And then the seller appoints broker as seller's sole and exclusive real estate agent. He grants broker the exclusive right to sell a property. What this means is we have a duty at the brokerage and for my agency to make sure that your interests are put above our own as a fiduciary relationship. This means our agency is the one that has that duty to you, and we're the only one that can offer it to the market and offer a commission to somebody else or compensation. And basically that we're your team. Goes on, part 2 is about the property. And this is a great place to say, look, have it pre-filled in. You have your listing legal description there. And then you talk about improvements. Improvements are anything like that are fixtures, that are permanently installed and built in. And talk about what they may be. Chandeliers, water softeners, kitchen equipment, garage door openers, all these things. And so they get an idea. And then accessories are the ones that are related to that. Window air conditioning units, fireplace screens, curtain rods. And then as you get through those 2 things, you go, is any of those accessories or personal items that you don't want to sell, that you want to keep with you? As you get them to answer the questions, you kind of fill it in, as you're going through it, even though they're not signing it yet, you're just saying, okay, fine. And we want to make sure that we make a note of this. So we're going to reserve the washer and dryer. We're going to reserve the, the window air conditioning and the Rubbermaid shed in the garage. Okay. And then you ask the question at the bottom there, is this part of a HOA, a property owner association? And it's yes or no. You check the appropriate box. And then listing price, you're like, all right, this is something that, like I said, we're going to do after we decide to work together. So we're going to come back to this. This is where you instruct me on what we're going to list this property after we have a discussion around price. Then you go into term. Term of the agreement typically is whatever term you typically do, 4 to 6 months, whatever it may be. And then, but I want to let you know that this says the seller is entering a binding contract to sell the property before the date listing begins, and the contract is binding on the date the listing begins. The listing will not commence and will be void. So the bottom line is, if the seller sells it before the list date, it's all bets are off. They don't owe you anything, right? But it says we're going to start it on Tuesday the 10th or whatever, at the 11th at blah blah blah. Then compensation. This is where you got to be ready for this one. The broker compensation says when earned and payable, seller will pay broker. This is where a lot of agents misunderstand this. This is where the total amount of compensation that you're charging the seller that they're going to pay for both sides, right? So you're going to offer up a portion of this to a sub agent or a buyer's agent that brings a buyer. And you've already explained why that's important, because that the MLS brings together a lot more buyers' eyes to your listing that are usually attached to a buyer's agent. So it's going to attract more and get more money for your property typically. So how do I earn this? Whatever percentage it may be is earned when any of the following happens. When the seller sells, exchanges, options, agrees to sell, agrees to exchange, or agrees to option the property to anyone at any price on any term. So if the seller agrees to a deal, they owe you a commission. Says broker individually or in cooperation with another broker procures a buyer ready, willing, and able to buy the property at the listing price or at any other price acceptable to the seller, or the seller breaches this listing. So a couple things, we'll get there in a second. So if a buyer's agent brings a full price non-contingent offer to your seller and they reject it at that point in time, the seller is on the hook for paying you a commission. The chances of that happen are very slim because every offer has some kind of conditions in it. So be aware of that. But this is one of those things. They're agreeing that if they get an offer that's acceptable to them, or it's full price and no conditions, right? A ready, willing, and able buyer, able to buy the property at the list price, then they owe you a commission. Then the seller breaches the listing. They're going to ask you, what's that mean? We're getting to that. Okay. And it's payable to the brokerage during the listing or after it ends, at the closing and funding of any sale or exchange of the property, or seller's refusal to sell the property after broker's compensation has been earned. Remember that buyer that got a full price offer, or seller's breach of the listing or such time as otherwise set forth in the listing. So broker's compensation is not payable if the sale of property does not close or fund as a result of seller's failure without fault of seller, that they can't deliver a clean title. They can get out of, they basically aren't owing us a compensation. If they get foreclosed upon or sued and they can't sell the property, they don't owe us a commission. And if they, from some reason, a storm happens and they can't restore the property to its prior condition, again, those are the conditions where they don't owe us a commission for even bringing a buyer. Then you go into a breach. What is breach? The next one is other ways where a broker could maintain income or payment from the seller. This is kind of key. It says, if seller collects breach by buyer under contract, if seller collects earnest money, the sales price, or damages by suit, compromise, settlement, or otherwise from a buyer who breaches the contract for sale of the property entered into during the listing, seller will pay broker after deducting attorney's fees and collection expenses an amount equal to the lesser of 1/2 of the amount collected after deductions or the amount of broker's compensation stated in 5A. Any amount under 5D1 is in addition to any amount the broker may be entitled to receive for subsequently selling the property. So if you have a listing, buyer goes through, buyer fails, buyer is in default, seller gets the buyer's earnest money. The contract states that after expenses to get that earnest money, half of it should go to the broker, in addition to if you continue to list it and sell it on top of the whatever percentage you agreed to sell it for. Now, most agents don't enforce this one, but it's in the contract. They need to be aware of it, that if the buyer defaults, you've already got the remedy of that. If they get anything, is split between them and the broker. Service providers, there may be a fee. We don't do that, but still, and other fees and reimbursement. They just need to go through this. And once again, it's not about being nervous. It's just talking about the contract, what it says. That's providing value to the seller, because most of the time they're not going to read it. And they appreciate you being professional enough to talk about it. Protection period says that means that the time starting the day after listing ends and continuing for blank days. Sell means any transfers. What it means here, that not later than 10 days after the listing ends, broker may send seller written notice specifying the names of persons whose attention was called to the property during the listing. So all this is saying that if the seller, if the listing expires or we terminate it by choice with the seller and us, this period of days afterwards, the seller's agent, listing agent, can send over a list. Hey, I know these 10 people saw the property while it was listed. If these 10 people buy it, I'm still owed a commission, okay, during this protection period, the 60-day, 30-day, whatever it may be. However, if the property is relisted with another brokerage, they don't owe us the commission, right? If the protection period expires, they don't owe us a commission. And then, so bottom line is, if they're obligated to pay another brokerage for a sale, it doesn't do you any good. It doesn't protect you at all. But so you know. And then it gives authorization that we can instruct escrow to withhold some of the funds to pay our compensation. Okay. So it's all taken care of for them. And then it goes into, now you've dealt with the term, sort of the how much you charge and why you charge what you do. Then you're going into what it means to market it, right? It's about the MLS. They really have a choice of either they want it on the MLS or they don't. Of course, you want them to have it on the MLS. And it talks about what that means, about content, about they're going to be honest and deliver things. There's broker content and there's seller content. Things given to the broker and the broker's content are broker's possession. Okay. Make this fairly quick. Access, talk about how the property shows. You've already talked about a lockbox. You've already talked about a sign, but you want to talk about safety. You want to talk about that they give you authorization to put a lockbox on. What hours do they want the property showed? 8 to 8, 10 to 5, whatever it may be. And then talking about the pros and cons of doing that. Yeah, tell them that we use a showing company if you do. They may get an email to approve a showing at a certain time and what a showing looks like, that they should leave, that they should leave the lights on or whatever it may be. You're counseling them on the best way to present their home when a buyer and agent shows the property. You're also counseling them that if a buyer shows up unaccompanied or an agent shows up after hours, that not to let them in, that they have to use a lockbox, that there's some safety issues to be aware of and to call you. Then, of course, what a key box is, that they authorize you to put a key box on the property, that we're not held liable for anything that happens to the property because of the access, it's, and so forth. And they hold us harmless in that process. And then you talk about, because I'm charging X percentage for my services, to attract buyers, I offer a co-op composition to other brokers that bring buyers. This is what we need to do. But it's broken down into 4 different things, either MLS participants or non-MLS. And the question here really typically is, under MLS rules, we only owe a compensation to MLS members. HAR, ABOR, SABOR, whatever. They have to be a member of that MLS. Unless in the agreement, we agree to pay non-MLS brokers. So, and generally, you want any agent that brings any buyer is a good one. So you want to be able to entice them to come by offering a co-op broker percentage. Then if a sub-agent, we talk about agency. Right now, I have a fiduciary duty to you if we sign this agreement to put your interest above my own. A buyer may have a buyer's agent, meaning they have an agreement in place with them where they have a duty to negotiate on their behalf. And that's where the other broker represents a buyer. A sub-agent is when they don't have a buyer-tenant rep agreement with them, but they still want to bring a buyer to buy your property. They're actually an agent for you, the seller, as a sub-agent. Do we want to offer them compensation, the same compensation or whatever, and talk around that? And typically we like to offer the same amount for all of these, but it's a way that they see that the total amount's being offered up to entice a buyer's agent to bring a buyer, whether it be a sub-agent or an MLS buyer's agent or a buyer's agent from somewhere else. Then we're talking about the quickly intermediary. And this oftentimes is a place we gloss over. This is one where in Texas and where we're at as a brokerage, we have, 1,700 agents in Houston alone. They all may have buyers. We have to allow my broker and us for other agents to show your property, because the broker becomes an intermediary in that case, HomeSmart to HomeSmart. So we want to check that. And then in the event we get a buyer that's unattached, we have several options that lays out in the contract here that either my broker will assign somebody else to represent the buyer can remain unrepresented, or we can at that point come to you and talk about modifying our agreement to allow one person to work with both parties later. This right here, all it does right here is allow other HomeSmart agents to show your property, which is what we want. 10, everything we talk about today and once we sign an agreement is private and confidential. I can't share anything you share with me. It's forever, even after the listing expires. And then this is one great place to talk about this, by the way, Jose and everybody else, is this right here. What you share with me prior to signing the agreement is not protected. What you share with me before and after is protected. I have a duty because under this agreement. That's why I want to show you what you might be signing. 11, obviously broker's authority talks about what you want it on the internet. Yes. What type of buyers? You can go through and talk about these different offerings, conventional buyers, VA buyers, FHA buyers, and showing your experience. You say, this is what it means to you. It'll cost you more for VA and FHA because they're not allowed to pay certain fees. And there may be stricter appraisal requirements and inspections, but in this market, 25% of the buyers are FHA buyers, or whatever the numbers it shows, oh, okay, we don't want to rule them out, but we need to be aware of what it is when we receive offers, why a conventional offer is stronger than an FHA offer if they're the same value, or a cash offer is better than so on. So based on the risk to you as a seller. Okay? And then of course, talks about what it means to advertise on the MLS. This is one where we're talking about, this is what you're saying, seller, that you have the clear title that you can sell. You have the right to sell it. You're not bound by any other listing agreement. No other person has a first right of refusal or lien on it that we know about. Sellers, you're not behind or delinquent in your loan. You're not aware of any other like objects there. You're not subject to any bankruptcy court or divorce court. And you're not subject to a relocation company, right? Down and down. Then this is what I do. You promise to work with us, to not rent or lease it, and not negotiate with any buyer that comes along, that you refer all buyers to me, the listing agent, that you not enter into another agreement with another brokerage while we're under a contract, that you maintain your property, you maintain the pool, and you complete all disclosures required by law, and you amend so when things change. And you can go through this fairly quickly, but this is usually you're getting them to nod their head like, yep, okay. Basically, you want them to work with you indirectly and professionally. And then if there's a limited liability, talks about how they hold us harmless, how they have to maintain the property, that we're not held responsible for theft and vandalism and so forth. And then default, it says if seller does not cooperate with the broker to facilitate the showing, marketing, or sale of the property, or otherwise breaches this listing, doesn't follow through, seller is in default and will be liable to the broker for the amount of the broker's compensations in 5A, the total amount. Okay. So that, and if there's not a purchase price involved, the listing price is the price they would go off of. Okay. This is interesting. Brokers entitled to receive under the listing. Broker may also terminate the listing and exercise any other remedy at law. If sales price is not determinable in the event of exchange or breach of listing, listing price will be the sales price for purposes of computing compensation. If broker breaches the listing, broker is in default, and seller may exercise any remedy under the law. So it gives them an error. Then there's the legalese about mediation, attorney's fees. The addenda, this is where we're just touching on them. It's like, I have to, by law, give you an IAB, as you probably already did. But by law, we have to include a seller disclosure unless you're exempt, like an estate or a foreclosure, in which we're not in that case. So we need to have you fill that out and give it to any potential buyer. And then whatever other addendums that you want to add to the contract. And then talks about the legalese, that this is the entire agreement. There's no side agreements, that if one of you cancels, it's still binding on the other one, and so forth. And then all notices have to be done in writing. And then right here, it says about compensation. You can go through this slow or quick. I love doing this because it talks about if it's older than 78, you talk about lead-based paint. You talk about local ordinances. You talk about you should talk to an attorney no matter what. I can't give legal advice. You should put away your jewelry and your drugs and prescriptions and firearms for any showings and any open houses. You should depersonalize it and those things. Broker advises them to read the material before it gets submitted to the MLS so the information is accurate. They should talk to their lender and get a payoff quote for their mortgage. They should do all of these things, and it's part of you guiding and instructing them on how to be ready and prepared for their listing and selling their property. It's a great place to spend some time and have some dialogue. And of course, you said, lastly, I can't give you legal advice. You're more than welcome to talk to an attorney, and you cover it. The quickest thing there is oftentimes when you've gone through this, you've gone listing presentation, they're ready to sign. They really are. If they're not, as one was saying, okay, fine. In the event, you're going to need to fill out the seller disclosure, right? So either you have them sign the listing agreement and then the seller disclosure, or you do the seller disclosure first and then you do the listing agreement. And what I've done is I've typically gone through the listing agreement with them, handed them the seller disclosure. They start filling it out. It's sort of like automatic. They have something to do. They sign that, hand it back to you. You hand them over the listing agreement and they sign it. It's because they've already committed to work with you at that point in time. Then once you've got the listing agreement signed and the seller disclosure finished, you set them aside and say, all right, great. I'm looking forward to working with you. Now let's talk about pricing, right? And this is really the best case scenario because you're going to revisit the pricing conversation we had before. Remember what I said about there are location and market conditions we can't do much about, but we need to look at them. We're going to look at what's going on with your location, what things in your market are selling for. We're going to talk about what the market's doing right now, where we're at as far as buyers, inventory, months of inventory, and so forth. We're going to talk about all of these things so we have a snapshot of what we're dealing with right now. Then you're going to share your CMA of the data you pulled, the value ranges you had, the comps you used, knowing they're going to ask about the neighbor's house. Yep, I pulled that one up as well in anticipation for you. It's 10 years newer. It's twice the size. It's not a good comp, but it hasn't sold yet. We'll have to see where it's at, or it did sell, and we can talk about the range. Oops, sorry. Okay, then you're going to discuss any condition items. Now, if we paint this back bedroom, I can get bids for you. It will help sell the property quicker. Or if we have a landscaper come out and do the front yard, it may not add value to the property, but it will make it sell faster because it looks like it's well maintained. Buyers will notice the condition of the home immediately at the front door. Whether it be cobwebs, whether it be paint undone, chips and things, that they can't overlook those things, and it obviously affects value or sellability. So then suggested that then if they have questions about certain comps, say, hey, let's schedule a time. Let's go out there and we'll look at these properties together. We'll look at our competition. And then you suggest, based on this data and this range, I would suggest pricing here because we know, and a lot of the stuff you've already shared, that 80% by NAR standards, 80% of the buyers that can buy your house will see it in the first 2 weeks. There will be other buyers that enter the market, but there's a pool of buyers that are waiting for a property like yours to come on the market. And we have the best shot of being in front of them. So we want to price it the best, present it the best, and have the best condition in those first 2 weeks. Now, we may not sell in those first 2 weeks, but we're going to get in front of the right buyers. And then as we don't want to be chasing the market, if you will. Then you suggest a price, you negotiate this because it's something you're doing together. And obviously if they want to go too high, you're like, I wouldn't be doing you any favors by pricing it there, but we can do this or whatever. The idea here is, once again, that 2 weeks period is the best time to make adjustments. And to price it correctly. Set the expectation about it and say, look, we're gonna test the market. This is based on the data today. Here's all the data we're extrapolating from my experience, from the market, from whatever. We're agreeing on this price. We're going to test it and find out, are we getting lots of activity? Are we getting lots of showings? Are we getting offers? Great. But if we get activity and we don't get no showings, we're going to have a conversation in 2 weeks about changing the price, and then follow up in 2 weeks. And you may not change the price, but you may. Or if you get lots of activities and lots of showings, then you're doing your job. They're not selling it for too low. The seller always has the ultimate right to accept an offer or not to accept an offer. Okay. And then set the expectation, obviously discuss showings and safety, but they're really looking out for them, and then thank them. It's amazing how this takes about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes from beginning to end, in my experience, and they are happy. The biggest thing here is now you set a great example of being professional. You've set a great example of what you're going to do. Then the next thing is to follow up when you get home. It says, all right, here's what we've done so far. A checklist. I've got the paperwork signed. It's uploaded. I'm going to put it in the MLS on this date. Signs are ordered. The pictures on this date will work for you. Photographer coming, I'll be there. Set the agenda for next step for the seller. You're following up with that. And then you're following up once those are done. And say, all right, now we're ready to go. We're good to go. And then you're following up with feedback you get from the listing. So obviously prepare, practice, deliver on your promises, and then go out there and do it. The biggest thing for sellers is communication. Winning the listing is the biggest thing. But after that, you've got to make sure you follow up and communicate. The sellers have no idea. They're not showing properties. They're not with you on a regular basis. They're not writing offers. They are waiting. So they're in the dark. And so the more you can say, this is when we'll communicate, the less they'll be calling you asking for updates, because you're like, look, every Friday at 2:00, I'm calling you with an update on what happened this week, unless we get an offer beforehand. Yeah. Every week we're talking about open houses, or every 2 weeks we're talking about prices. You put it out into a calendar, and then you keep it, and it will save you time. It will make you look more professional, and your sellers will be ecstatic. Ultimately, they won't be happy until you sell the property. But if you lay the groundwork there, they won't complain about communication. They'll rave about you to their friends, and you'll follow through and be very professional, right? The goal, and that's one thing, is that's why a lot of newer agents will take a listing that can't sell. It's overpriced. Don't do that. First of all, I know it's hard, but it's business, right? But this is where you set the example, because you want a sellable listing, because that's going to propel you to more listings and more referrals. If you do all the things right and overprice it and it doesn't sell, it's going to hurt you. Reputation wise, it's going to be seen. Another agent will come in and price it right, and it will sell. You'll look bad. So just don't do that. You don't want a property on the market forever for the business, because other agents are watching, other sellers are watching, other buyers are watching as well. So gaining market share is really about serving your client, but getting a sellable and listing that's priced right. Okay. I'll stop sharing. Any questions on that? Like I said, you can do any order you want. I mean, I've had listings where I came up and they had interviewed 5 other agents, and all they wanted to talk about was CMA. And I still have to go through the process. This is how I work, how I'm different. There's a lot of similarities. You've gone through it. This is my promise to you as far as communication. And then I'll go through the CMA with them, and then I'm not trying to win the listing based on the price I can list it for. I'm being brutally frank with them about, all right, they've all, and especially if you have the advantage of coming in last, where you have other agents that said, I can sell it for X amount. And I'll come in, and if it's too high, I'll say that's too high. I can't sell it for that. It's just not going to sell. Or if it's too low. I had one where I came in, I was the 6th top agent in the market. They interviewed all the top agents for a high-end listing. It was a luxury listing by an attorney. And they were all about 40 grand less than I was. And I said, I'm conservative. I never overprice a listing. I don't know where they're coming up with numbers. I don't. I said, but this is my numbers. This is where I would list it at, and it's very rare for me to be higher than everybody else is. But I said, I just trust what I do. And they went with me, and they may have went with me because I was priced higher. Who knows? But they liked how blunt I was and how direct I was. And it sold in the first weekend for my asking price. There was one buyer that had been looking for a house in that market and had been waiting for 6 months, and they were willing to pay whatever we listed it for. So, and the praise for it was fine, great, but it's okay. It works sometimes, but generally I'd be cautious if I'm above everybody else. But I did the comps 6 ways a Sunday. Well, here's where we're at, and I got like 5 referrals from that guy, so it was fantastic, and helped them buy a property. So be aware of that. A lot of it has to do with confidence and competence, and if you don't have that, you can build it. So sometimes you come in and a lot of it is just you're providing value, because most of them feel like they're being sold. Or they're trying to divert the conversation to how much you're going to charge me, trying to find a discount, or they're trying to find what's the price you can sell it for. And if you teach them early enough that it's not about those things, it's about getting a sellable property that is beating the competition, and I'm the one that you want to work with, that you're going to enjoy working with and not have problem with later. And as you prep them, and I'll finish this with today, is every listing, every buyer will have problems. And that's where you can lean on and say, look, this is what we can anticipate. But if things go wrong, meaning a buyer's financing fails, meaning a buyer's inspection comes back with results, we've navigated those things before. I'll walk with you every step to navigate each hurdle to get us to the closing. And that's one thing where if you say it's gonna be perfect, something's gonna happen. But if you explain to them up front that there's gonna be issues, you don't know what they are yet, but there's going to be a problem that we're going to face together and we'll overcome, and that you are their advocate in their corner, huge. So when something happens, whatever it may be, buyer is a jerk or lender is late, whatever it may be. Yep. See, this is one of those problems. We'll overcome it together. Here's our solution. Very, very powerful. And that will give you more referrals as well. Any questions? It's a lot to cover in a short period of time, but hopefully it was helpful. And next week, 2 weeks from now, we'll talk about, now you got an offer. Now what, right? So, all right, guys.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend. You're welcome, Nelly.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.